Gleaner, a real estate attorney here in New Jersey. My law firm, Robert A. Gleaner, PC, serves the South Jersey community with all real estate issues. Today we're here and we're going to talk about habitability issues in a landlord-tenant relationship. Let's talk about the 3 points we're going to review here today. Number one, it goes without saying that a landlord has an obligation to provide a habitable property to a tenant. That means that everything's functioning properly, the toilets work, the plumbing works, the heating and air conditioning works, the roof is solid, there's no leaks. Generally, it has to be habitable. That's your obligation as a landlord, and of course, when you provide that habitable property, the tenant has the obligation to pay their rent. On the other hand, the tenant has to keep that property in good condition, maintaining it properly, general cleanup, general maintenance, and even reporting major issues to the landlord if there's something wrong with the heating or air conditioning, for instance, and making a prompt report to the landlord of things that have to be fixed up. So there's that joint obligation there, the landlord's obligation to provide the habitable property and the tenant to generally maintain it. All right, number two, what conditions make a property uninhabitable? Let's get into that a little bit more deeply. Let's talk about it the other way, actually. What are the habitable conditions? Heating and air conditioning. As a matter of fact, the Appellate Division of the Superior Court has held that air conditioning is a condition that makes a property habitable or uninhabitable. So if the air conditioning breaks down, that has to be fixed. That's a landlord obligation. Same thing with heating. It's generally any environmental condition, any plumbing condition, broken toilet, you have to replace that, roofing. Those are the basics. Sometimes tenants will argue about minor conditions that you may not consider to be a habitability issue. And I'll give you a good example when we get down here to number 3 about an experience that I had in court concerning that. But you really have to give a careful analysis when a tenant complains about a condition in the property and whether it really makes it habitable or not. Now, you may choose to fix up some minor conditions because after all, it's your property and you want to keep it up. But you may have those real tenants who are very complaining about everything, and you have to judge really whether they're really complaining about something serious or not. But generally, just use your common sense. You have to have a place that is heated properly, that's cooled properly, and that doesn't leak. And really, if you do that, you should be within the bounds of where you're supposed to be. All right, number 3. Tenant withholds rent because the tenant believes that it was a habitability issue and you disagreed with them. You didn't fix it as the landlord. They said, well, I'm withholding the rent until you do. What do? Well, you're going to have to file an action for eviction. You're going to have to evict the client, arguing that they didn't pay their rent in full. So here's the procedure of what happens when that occurs. You're going to file your eviction action, and I could go through the procedure of that. I'm not going to do that here. One of my other videos will talk about what the court action actually is. But you're in court now, and you're telling the judge they didn't pay the rent. And the tenant says, Judge, I didn't pay the rent because the place was terrible. There was leaks here, and they were making all kinds of arguments. And they say that on the first day of court. The judge is going to say, okay, fine, I'm going to give you a habitability hearing, but we're not going to hear it today. You have to post the amount of the rent by 4 o'clock this afternoon. And if you post that rent, I'm going to schedule your habitability hearing for next week. And procedurally, that's the way it happens. So one of 2 things is either going to happen. Either they're going to pay the rent to you and forget about their habitability claim, or they will. They'll post their rent in court, and they will get a habitability hearing. I actually had this. We went into court. There was a bunch of things that they were arguing, and the judge was listening very carefully to the tenant's complaints. And one of the things the tenant said was, Judge, the landlord didn't caulk around the tub. It was terrible. It was leaking. And the judge said to the tenant, were you taking showers? And the tenant said yes. And the judge said, well, then it's not a habitability issue. You see, there's all kinds of things that the tenant can argue about, but whether or not it really makes it a premises where they can actually live and impacts on their lifestyle, on their ability to live there, on their comfort level, is two different things. And caulking around the bathtub, even if it's leaking a little bit, would not necessarily rise to the level of habitability and allow them to withhold the rent. Now, so what would a judge do if there was a determination that the tenant was right, that it devalued the property in some way? So let's just take an example. They might make an argument about something. The judge would say, okay, instead of paying $1,000 for that month, you only have to pay $800 for that month. So now the landlord knows that they can either take rent from now on at $800 a month, or they can fix that and go back to the other number. So that's basically the way it plays out. More often than not, it doesn't play out that way because nobody is so hard-headed that they want to try the whole thing. But in those cases, that's what happens when the tenant withholds the rent. All right, so let's have a quick review. Habitability issues. Number one, the landlord has an obligation to provide a habitable property in good condition. Number two, what conditions make it habitable? You have to take care of the heating, the air conditioning, any environmental conditions, plumbing. That's what makes the property habitable. Number three, what do you do if the tenant argues that it's uninhabitable and withholds the rent? Procedurally, you sue them for eviction, and then you go to court, and the judge will decide whether or not you were right or whether the tenant was right. Here's the best advice I can give you. They argue that, call me. We can go to court together, and we can establish your position before the court. Again, I'm Rob Gleaner, real estate attorney based in Audubon, New Jersey. Happy to handle all of your real estate needs, zoning, land use, residential and commercial real estate deals, and of course, landlord-tenant issues. Talk to you next time.